Good day, brothers and sisters, and we're here to discern it. Alex says show here at the Glen Zone with Glenn Herring and Rome. As usual, per request. Rome, show me what you got.
The humble hustler right here.
Yes. And we are not the only people hustling. There's hustlers all over the world, and they're hustling us for the most part. Oh, and not only is the kindest way, unfortunately, or the best way, and a lot of people are dying as a result of this hustle, you know, military industrial complex hustle, which is pretty sick. And you don't even know which part you would take in it. And if you don't know you're taking a part in it, you definitely are in it. Well, you know, most recent news coming from Ukraine, Crimea, another attack on Crimean Bridge, which is a supply line, not only for the civil world, but also for military world. And I think that's why it's being attacked. And if you haven't seen what has happened, what has happened. This is the video from the train. That's a bridge right next to the car bridge connecting Crimea to mainland Russia. And as you can see, I'll play that again. As you can see, it's a span that was demolished by the water drones. And as a result, it wasn't just a bridge that got demolished. Unfortunately, 2 people have died, and you know, a child was left an orphan. So that's a casualty of war. This is not just bombs blown off and tanks exploding and the soldiers dying, the civilian casualties. And this is apparently a terroristic act. And by the way, Ukraine admits to it on Ukrainian television, and we can see it, or the news source that released it. Like Kyiv does admit that it's behind new Crimean Bridge attack, because we had one a few months ago. I don't know how long ago we covered it. But according to an outlet source, the key infrastructure linking the peninsula with mainland Russia was attacked by an unspecified number of sea surface drones. So like some unmanned robots. It was difficult to reach the bridge, but finally the task was accomplished. You know, they are proud of doing so. And last time, you know, Russia responded pretty severely with their attack, where they flew, you know, they shot a whole bunch of rockets back at Kiev, and you know, it wasn't a happy time for Ukrainian civilians, unfortunately, as well. And that is the casualty. And when we talk about war, it's war on people. This is not Russians versus Ukraine. This is not West versus Russia, although it seems like that is the case, but the casualty are the people. Now, what came out of it, and Russia says that has nothing to do with that, is the Black Sea grain deal is terminated, right? So they had a grain deal that they made a deal with countries around Black Sea, UN, and other places to deliver the grain across the world, because Ukraine and that region of Russia produced, I don't know, Glenn, what is it, 15 to 20% of all the grain in the world?
Yeah, Ukraine is always in the top 3 of the grain production in the world. And but the deal that they made between Russia and the West, it was the West that was reneging on the deal all the time. This grain specifically was supposed to go to poor countries, but the overwhelming majority of it went back into Europe to keep the inflation rates down.
Well, as a result, right away, you can see, and that's why I'm saying this is the war on people. You know, in Canada, here we experiencing inflation. And what do you call it? Not inflation. Stagflation. Stagflation, right?
Stagnant economy with continuous inflation. In other words, devalue the currency at the same time.
And Christian Trudeau blame it on Russia because of the war with Ukraine and supply chains being affected. So is you know, American counterparts as well. And wheat prices now, as a result, surging across the world. Now, Glenn, you say that's a good thing for Canada.
Well, our market, because Canada is always in the top 3, like Ukraine, for production of wheat. So if the wheat prices go up, it's going to be good for the Canadian market, the Canadian exporters, and the farmers of Canada, obviously. But this is a play game all the time because they play with the markets all the time to control the prices of the commodities. Something will resolve from this. They're just not going to let all that grain go to waste, especially when you hear that inflation is causing food problems for people. The food banks are, can't keep up with the demand, and this is in the first world countries. What's it going to be like down the lucky ladder?
Well, UN asked Putin. This is where the conspiracy comes in, or whatever. UN asked Putin to extend Black Sea grain deal in return for SWIFT access, and that was, sources, right? Reuters claimed that on July 12th, which was 5 days before the the extension, supposed extension that was supposed to happen, and then the terrorist act that supposedly, well, Russians say it has nothing to do with that, and they made a business decision because now Russians have their own grain to sell and at much higher rate, and they don't have to sell it to the Western countries. They can sell it to India, China, Africa, etc. at their own prerogative at much higher prices. So it is a business deal, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, and it's that this is also going into the oil market as well, because Russia, well, OPEC plus, which is Russia, have been slowly but surely diminishing the amount of oil that's allowed to come on the market. But basically, that's just to protect the prices around this rate, because the world is actually consuming less energy because the whole world is slowing down.
Well, good point you bring up. Actually, Russia is to overtake Saudi Arabia as a top oil producer on top of that. Because Russia doesn't really want to, or doesn't really care about playing by the rules of the West anymore in terms of, let's do this. Well, at least it seems that way, right? If we're talking about polarization, and if we still consider Russia being outside of the world influence, right? Then that's the case. I don't believe so, to tell the truth, and it's just a shift of power to me, and somebody is still making money on that. Glenn, what do you think?
Yeah, and it's strange when you look at how the media plays things. In the West, we always heard that Exxon was, number one in the world for a long time, and then it was Saudi Aramco. But now that Saudi Arabia seems to be more interested in doing deals with China, now we hear that Saudi Arabia is the top. But actually, champ, the real one is, and if you Googled, you wouldn't even see it in the top 10 big companies in the world, but it's Gazprom, which is Russian-owned by their state-owned Rosneft. That is supposed to be the biggest one, the true one in the world, producer of oil.
And maybe war is part of that. But war is to remove, and that's what they were doing, and that's why I think the smashed, because I think Gazprom then would be. Are they also natural gas producers as well? Is that part of the same conglomerate? Okay. So Beijing wants, revive the deal. They're really hoping that it doesn't, die out, which it did. But what the Russians saying is like, well, it has nothing to do with the terrorist act, and that it's everything to do with, like you said, the Western counterpart not what do they call doing their part, right? So they actually saying as soon as the Russian part of the agreement is fulfilled, the Russian side will return to the implementation of the deal immediately. Right. So again, somebody did not play by the rules of the agreement. And again, I don't know, Glenn. There's so many elements in this. And long story short, some people are going to go hungry, and economies will be affected across the world. So the level and quality of life for old people in the world is going to drop down as a result of that action.
Yeah, wheat and grain, the products of, is number one or number two for carbohydrate sources in the world. The other one is obviously rice. And this is energy. Human food is energy for human beings. Now, if you put a supply chain problem on energy for humans, now we're in trouble. Okay, our brothers and sisters, they perish at a quick rate and a very painful rate. All for control.
And U.S. Says it's not ready for the war with Russia. The White House says it specifically, right? So we have security advisor Jake Sullivan. He went on recently talking about this, and it seems strange to me, that statement, because the U.S. has specifically been so deeply ingrained into this conflict from the beginning, from the Maidan, right, from 2014, with Nuland and Graham spending the best taxpayer money that they could, right, as they said it, and continue to fuel. Well, basically, they're paying for all the bureaucratic salaries. They're sending all the armies, and not just U.S., but all the NATO countries. And we also know that they have intelligence. The same thing what actually Russia accuses US and UK specifically in saying they're ultimately responsible for Crimean Bridge terror attack. And the US and UK are ultimately responsible for the deal for the latest attack on Crimean Bridge. The Russian foreign minister has claimed Moscow has accused Ukraine of being behind the incident on Monday, which left at least 2 civilians dead and saw the key transport link between the peninsula and mainland Russia closed for car traffic. This regime, the Ukrainian government, is terrorist and has all the hallmarks of an international organized crime group, right? So, of course, they're going to do that. Ukrainian officials and military personnel take those decisions and direct input from American and British special services and politicians. The U.S. and Britain managing a state-like terrorist structure. So, of course, Russia is going to scream they are terrorists. And if going back to Afghanistan and Mujahideen, right? We know for a fact that U.S. created that terrorist organization, and they are implemented it and they sponsored it throughout the war. So, how's that different? I mean, do we have a memory of the goldfish? We don't. We remember those things happening. Right, Glenn? Why are we still playing this game and pretending this is not happening?
Champ, the United States of America hasn't won a war in over half a century. They didn't win in the Indochina and Vietnam wars. They didn't win in Afghanistan. They didn't win in Iraq. They didn't. Well, they ruined Libya, and they're saying, "Oh, we're not ready for a war with Russia." Yeah, no kidding. And then you also have this constant war drum beating about with China in Taiwan. We're not ready for this. What the world is ready for is no more war and everybody getting together. That's what the world is ready for now.
You know what, Glenn? It brings me to this point, and I wonder, I'm asking the question to the panel. How many wars did the U.S. actually try to win?
Are they trying to win? That's a good point. If it's a panel, okay, let's do the panel. Are they actually even trying? Is that the purpose of the war? I think the purpose of the war, specifically in the last century, is not, and if we're talking about Agenda 2030, 2050, is not to win the war. Okay, yes, it is to win the war, but what is the war? Define the war. If the war is to kill as many people as possible, is to enslave people, to IMF them, right? Whatever that means, we can get into it as well. If that's, then yes, they have one menu. They have okay. So and how does it escalate? It started with like, okay, let's give them some intelligence, blah blah, and now it escalated to cluster bombs. So now, by the way, those many conventions, right? Many conventions that forbid use of mines and cluster bombs, and now U.S. sending cluster bombs. You know, some people say, well, that's because they're running out of ordinary ammunition. I say that's bullcrap. You have all those industrial military complex, and you can't, spend $500 million that you're sending to Ukraine on ammunition here to send them bullets. It has nothing to do with that. They just want to cause more harm and kill more people. That's how I perceive it. Am I splitting hairs here, Rob? No, it seems like you guys want to say something. Go ahead, tell me.
No. I just had that as a question because, a lot of us are spectating watching this movie because that's pretty much what it is. It's a movie, right? People are playing a role and showing you one side and acting. For all we know, they're all shaking hands in the back room somewhere. So,
I say this all the time. That's exactly my statement. There's no polarization. You can ask Glenn. Glenn, that's my position. That's
he says it all the time.
Yeah. Any corporation, any family, is something even as small as a family, right? You go to your mom for this, and mom says no. You go to dad. You know, dad says yeah, so you think you know what I mean? You think you got a point because you went to dad and you got it. But mom and dad are in cahoots. You know what I mean? They're together.
Oh yeah, bad cop, good cop in the parents. Is that how it was for you, Ro?
No.
There's no cop.
In the movies.
All right, so we have Blinken actually, well not Blinken, what's his name? Sullivan, Jake Sullivan, commenting on cluster bombs. Let's watch this. Oops, where's my sound?
Munitions. Number one, look, I understand the rationale. It's been explained. You've painstakingly explained, and I know this is not a unanimous decision in NATO. But have we not lost our moral authority on something like this as a leader on this stuff when it comes to, look, we just got rid of our chemical weapons, and we've been trying to lead the world in getting rid of that, and we try to rhetorically lead the world in trying to get rid of these barbaric weapons, and then here we are now still going into our stockpile and giving them to an ally. Does that not harm our moral authority?
Well, Chuck, our moral authority has not derived from being a signatory to the Convention Against Cluster Munitions. We have not been at any point since that convention came into effect. Neither has Ukraine. Our moral authority and Ukraine's moral authority in this conflict comes from the fact that we are supporting a country under brutal...
What he's saying, brothers and sisters, I don't care about any agreement. My name is Bennett. I'm not in it. That means if you cannot hold yourself accountable to any document or signatory to any world, convention, like what's the point of all those conventions? You can break them all the time. And that's why NATO and UN and all this other crap that exists has no purpose, because does not actually enforces any of the things that they try to oppose on all other nations. Okay, let's watch that. Okay, go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah, moral authority being dictated by the Anglo-American Empire, pushing LGBTQ rights all around the world, because that's okay, but using cluster munitions to kill as many people as possible. That's moral authority.
Okay.
Vicious attack by its neighbor, with missiles and bombs raining down on its cities, killing its civilians, destroying its schools, its churches, its hospitals. And the idea
that sounds like chemical weapons in Iraq. That's what it sounds like. If we don't stop Putin because he's killing Ukrainian people and all that stuff. I'm not saying there's no civilians dying in Ukraine as a result of the war actions, but you justifying, escalation of the war. And okay, I just want to hear the end of his story.
Yeah, that providing Ukraine with a weapon in order for them to be able to defend their homeland, protect their civilians, is somehow a challenge to our moral authority. I find questionable. I would say that
that's called gaslighting, brothers and sisters.
Is that what it's called? I've been waiting for, man, I've been hearing that term all year.
So
that's what it is.
That's what it is. So it's like, he's like, oh, no, we did nothing wrong. We're here to defend Ukraine from evil, that it is Putin, right? We may like Russian people, maybe. But no, we don't really like them because NATO cannot exist without an enemy. And an enemy is Russia, post-Soviet Union Russia in this place. So again, but then we go beyond that in understanding that we're being polarized intentionally. So we do fight each other for those reasons. I don't know. Do you want to hear the rest of what he says, Glenn, or we're done with this guy?
No, but another reason why we know that Ukraine, it was told to us by James Bradley the other day. He knows for a fact that that's just a big money laundering country right now, too. And a lot of this money that we're sending over there, the majority of it is coming back. And now, today I just read that Biden's president raising money for the presidency is just about more than all the other Republican people together. And apparently this is the money that's coming back, being laundered and fenced and going back into the Democratic election process of Mr. Biden again.
But it's how it's always been. Like, nobody even denies it. They discovered it. And again, there's no democratic election process in the West. I don't believe at all. and by not believing, there's plenty of evidence that you can look into yourself, into Dominion, for example, and like you said, foreign financing of the electoral process by organizations like Meta. But again, if you say like, okay, well, so for some reason, if you say it's okay just to send weapons there, cluster bombs, and you're saying that there are no soldiers on the ground, they just call them mercenaries, right? They dress them up into mercenaries, and U.S. is trying to use foreign mercenaries to plug gaps in Ukraine. They are in for a rude awakening, Russians saying. So it is true. But again, I believe, like I said, if this is my position, you can disagree with me, and I think it's also in the Russian interest to prolong the war. So, but if we're prolonging the war, then we have more mass casualties, civilian casualties. So is it necessary evil, or is it just part of the depopulation agenda? Like that opens up the whole, and we can we can talk about it forever. West, what Zelensky says about it, or Zelensky aide says, West lucky that Ukrainians are dying on its behalf. And it's true. That's what it is. The beating of the Western military industrial complex and the bankers and all that stuff was done by the hands of Ukrainian people. And that's who's dying on the battlefield, unfortunately. Russians are dying too. But, I'm sure Ukrainians, no matter how patriotic they are, nobody wants to go to war, especially with the draft they've been having and all that.
Yeah, it's just another proxy war, champ. It's a Cold War. It's going on. It's just using other countries now. It's always like that. The big guys, put the little ones to fight each other, and they're the ones who profit off of it. And, Mr. and Mrs. Average are the one who suffer from this.
Did you see that? Zelensky is basically a Britney Spears of the of the political world. He is an actor, and he did play some raunchy roles in the screen and on the theater, and he did some skits that are pretty outlandish out there. But basically, he's a cheerleader for the Western world in that theater, and by cheerleader I mean like a puppet, muppet, or whatever you want to call him. And the European Union ignored Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's request to be invited to the bloc summit with Latin America heads of state and government, Barcelona's Lavanguardia has reported. So basically, remember, Glenn, we did this episode a few days ago about Dylan Mulvaney and Britney Spears of the world, when they are needed to be used as props to use them, and then they drop them. Glenn, what do you think would be his fate in the near future? Does he ever actually has a chance to survive or be killed either by Russians or the proxies?
Or I think he's going to play out his real goal in life. He'll transgender, and then nobody will recognize him into a make-believe her, and that'll be it for him, her, it, whatever.
That'll be it. So I don't know. We asked James Bradley, and he thinks that the war is inevitably escalating to some kind of Ukrainian conflict. And I've heard this before, brothers and sisters. And again, I'm not here to scare you, but if there's going to be a nuclear exchange between West and East, it'll be limited exchange, and it'll be not exchanged on the American or Russian territory, because if it does, it's the end of the world. But if it's going to be limited nuclear exchange, it will be some kind of NATO country like Finland or Poland specifically. So I think that's what they're inching for, because if it does, let's say if the nuke does go towards Russia, that Russia isn't going to stop, and they're going to send all the nukes over, and then it's over for everybody. And again, I don't think that's the likely scenario here. I don't think this is what we're going to encounter. But if it is plausible in any way, it'll be Poland or Finland. And I don't know if, for some reason, if I'm terribly right about this, please forgive me. I'm not trying to co-create this scenario, but I heard this. And again, maybe this is what they want to tell us. By the way, the Russians don't want to do it. And the Russian experts issue a collective rebuke to call for preemptive nuclear strike. So again, the Russians do not want this escalation, but guess who does? And U.S. As NATO looks for answers to the Ukraine conflict, Poland seeks the nuclear option. And again, there's obviously they are being used because they are getting some U.S. money to host some rockets and some army bases and all this other stuff. So maybe it's in their interest to escalate it. Plus, they want to get a piece of Ukraine. They do want to get a piece of Ukraine.
Yeah, maybe also a tit for tat, you kill my dog, I kill your cat scenario, where Belarus now apparently has nuclear weapons. So then the West says, okay, we'll put them in Poland, to match.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I also believe, the world and entertainment has done such a great job of lowering people's attention span that they have to stretch this thing out a lot more. The same thing, remix it, add this, add that, but it's all the same movie.
So my question is, what do you think Trump would have done, or would he do? He says it will take him 24 hours to to finish the thing. Well, but by the way, when we talk about like de-escalation, like send negotiators versus weapons, this is what Trump had to say on his de-escalation. He said, "I know Zelensky very well," and that's exactly. Can you do Trump voice? I know Zelensky, and I can't do that right now. And I know Putin very well, even better. And I had a good relationship, very good, with both of them. I would tell Zelensky, no more. You got to make a deal. I would tell Putin, if you don't make a deal, we are going to give him a lot. So he's threatening, he's saying he's going to threaten Putin when Putin said, we're not going to be threatened. And we have nukes. We are going to give them more than they ever got it. If we have to, I will have a deal done in 1 day and 1 day. So this is, I think, a theater, because I don't think the strong arm in Putin is going to work in this space. Although I don't know, like, again, do I have faith in Trump to stop this conflict? Maybe. And maybe that's what Putin is waiting for as well, for the next administration to make a deal with on many fronts, not just to stop the Ukraine war. And but it's been an economical war, and it's been the war on people for the most part. And as a result, like, there's been some disheveling. And we talk about BlackRocks of the world devaluing the economy, devaluing the corporations, and then buying them out. Like when IKEA left, they left all the factories in Russia. McDonald's left, and they just got took over by a different Russian corporation. And now they're making business without sending money back to to the U.S. corporate headquarters and all that stuff. What's happening recently, and I don't know if it has anything to do with the grain deal, Glenn, and we're going to close the show on that, but Putin is actually repossessing, right? What is he doing? He is temporarily nationalizing assets of foreign companies. Do you think it's anything to do? Do you think the grain deal and all that stuff, including this, it's like, okay, you're not going to give us what we want, then we're going to nationalize all of the investment here in Russia.
Yeah, well, his hands are a little bit tied, that it's almost like he has to do it, and then they vilify him for doing something he has to do, because they've taken Russia completely out of the SWIFT payment system. And Danone, which is a yogurt company owned by companies in France, he has to take it back. And plus, the other countries are doing all the assaults on the assets of the Russians. So
Canada took the plane, for example.
Exactly. And the other one is Carlsberg, which is a Danish company. So, life has to keep going on. So if they say, well, you don't want to play ball? Okay, well, we'll just start our own game. And this is exactly what he's doing. But just going back to a fact about when Trump was running the United States of America, he really de-escalated the problem in Syria. There was no problem with Kim Jong-un, Mr. Rocket Man in North Korea. He had no problems with China. He got along with Xi very well. And he got along with Putin. And yet our Prime Minister here in Canada didn't really get along with Trudeau that much, with Trump that much. And now that Trump is not in the picture and Biden's in the picture, you see Trudeau all of a sudden buddies with the Americans, sending money, sending our Canadian dollars over to something that's really not our business. And meanwhile, Canadians, North Americans, United States, people are dying on the streets. They're starving. They're going to be entering in the hardest times they saw since the World War II. And, we don't have money for our own people, but we have money to send to other countries to cause more death.
And that's the point. Like we just discussed the war in Ukraine and all the things revolving around that. Don't focus on the parties, focus on the people. That's us. We are suffering as a result here in Canada. Our brothers and sisters suffering all over the world, even though there's no particular conflict right here in terms of, bombs exploding and, bullets flying over our heads. I mean, in some cases like Chicago, that's pretty much Ukraine at this point. But the overall, brothers and sisters, this is the war on you. And if you don't see it yet, then wake up. Brothers and sisters, we love you very much. We're not here to threaten you with this stuff. We just wanted to show you this is not what it seems. Please discern. Don't read into the stuff that show you on the Legacy Media. Just tune into Alex Sass show here at the Glen Zone with Glenn Herring and Rome. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.